I think we should probably begin. Hello, everyone. How are you this morning? Good. I'm good. Happy to be in Fresno. As you can see, I'm in Fresno State. I'm happy to be here. And I'm excited to have a conversation with you all. Let me just get a sense of who's in the room. If you are a school administrator, can you raise your hand? Okay. Teacher, district leader, nonprofit person. Okay. Did I miss anything else? Board member. Board member. Great. Okay. This conversation is going to apply to all of us. So let's see where we get to this. Is about equity traps and tropes, and we're going to talk about how we prevent our intentions for equitable school transformation from going awry. There was a big conversation in the big room around what do we do now, how to create more congruence. And what I want to talk to you all about is having awareness around the incongruence and starting to have strategies that allow you to take daily action for us to move more closely to putting our intentions with our impact. My name is Jamila, and this is just a little bit about me. We're going the wrong way. I was a teacher in Washington, D.C. That was my first group of kids. I love them so much. I will talk a little bit more about some of the things that I almost missed with this group of children. I was a school leader at UMA Mandarin Immersion School in Oakland, California. I spent a lot of time with educational leaders at this point. 2 of them are in this3room. And I spend that time really focused on equity-centered leadership development. And I am a mother of 3 children. I have a bonus son, 2 that I had on my own. And I love that picture because I feel like it represents how we are as very goofy people. If I had time, I would tell you all dad jokes. That's my favorite thing to do. I'm really good at very, very bad jokes. Wait, let's do that. Why was the groom late to school? It overswept. I love dad jokes. This work can be really hard, so I have to find ways to bring joy and levity to it. And the last thing I'll say just about me is that I am here by myself in this body right now, but I'm standing on the shoulders of ancestral greats. And so this conversation is only an extension of a conversation that's been happening for a very long time. So that's a little bit about me. You'll learn a little bit more as we go through. There are several hopes I have for today. One, I just want to affirm the efforts that we are putting in to transform schools. None of us are in here just like twiddling our thumbs, so we want to affirm some of that. I also want to create some dissonance between our intentions and impact. We're all doing stuff, but what are we actually doing? To help us with awareness around that dissonance, I want to talk about 10 equity traps and tropes that really hinder our efforts to work toward equity. And then I want us to obviously lead from a place of action. So we'll talk about some ways you can build awareness around equity traps and tropes every single day in your work. The last thing I'll say about this is that this is the article that was written, and it really, I guess, resonated with a lot of people. But this content comes from chapter 2 of the book Street Data. So if you've heard of that book, this content comes from a book called Street Data. It's chapter 2. And we put this idea of looking at equity traps and tropes at the beginning because people love to pick up a new framework, a new curriculum, a new idea, and do it. And Street Data is really something we want people to just go and do. So, enough of the framing in terms of what we're up to. Just want you to know some agreements I am holding. They come from Aorta, an anti-oppressive facilitation guide around having equity-centered conversations. We are going to be in dialogue with each other, but I just want you to know that I said I don't want you to get a feel by yourself because no one knows everything. Together we know a lot. And so I'm going to be asking you to contribute in the discussion because it's going to be better if we have your voices. And abundance mindset will be required. I'm pretty good at catching deficit thinking and not saying that's bad, but asking questions about what that's about. Bottom left is assume positive intent, but think about impact. I may say something that is offensive to you. We have a lot of new language we're learning to be inclusive in spaces, and so if I do that, let me know. I'll focus on my impact, but I don't do it in front of the whole group. Going to the side. And I actually do the same thing for others. The impact on other people is what's important. Bottom right is we can't be articulate all the time. I really think that resonates with the conversation in there, like what is articulate, what is being, speaking properly and all of that, that's a part of it. But the other piece I want to invite is speaking in first drafts. It's a very hard discussion. And then finally, let's just be with ourselves, each other, and our kiddos. Okay, so why this conversation? Why now? Please take out a piece of paper. Doesn't need to be a cute paper, just a paper. It's gonna be hard to do it in your phone, so a paper will be great. On this piece of paper, you are going to do this. You're gonna make a column, T-chart, if you would like to. On the left side, I want you to consider, and you're giving your roles. Oh man, stop. To that second column with the things that they know about. Last minute. Okay, if you would not mind with a partner, it's going to be easiest if it's with a partner because you'll have more time to talk. I would love for you to just discuss what criteria did you use when you chose the students when you chose the students you wrote down. What inspires you about this group of students? What skills, gifts, talents do they bring? There is no right answer to the criteria, it doesn't really matter. Just what criteria did you use and what do they know about? Please share your responses with a partner. Anyone willing to put that into the space? There's no right answer.
I'll go.
Yes.
I'm not an educator, but I do video.
Yeah.
I work with schools to tell stories. So the students I wrote about are ones that I've actually spent time interviewing and putting together video content. And just two things I think that are worth sharing is they see things adults no longer see. And what I find when I interview them, if you listen really closely, they'll tell you stuff that's like really profound that we forgot when we're like 40 and 50 years old. Actually, Fleek, Ordinary Fleek here, she's from Madeira. One of their students was at one of their secondary schools, and he said something pretty profound, which was if you, I call him a misfit, like the kids that don't fit into the pattern, so he got sent to another school. And he was graduating, and he was like their student speaker, and he said something really profound, which was if you treat me like I was yesterday, you'll miss the fact that I'm willing to meet you today. Oof. And so the fact is, like, he talked about how teachers keep him on the other side of class, and they keep treating him, they keep teaching this way. But today he's having a good day, and he would be willing to, if you were willing to meet him, he'd be willing to meet you. And the fact that he could recognize that is something we don't see anymore, because we just keep defining people that we know by how they treated us yesterday or how we defined them yesterday. And then the one other thing I would say is they have like all of the things that we feel like are necessary. I believe all individuals really do. It's like they have all the pillars. It's the kindness, the trustworthiness, everything we write on the wall that we tell them to do, and then we get mad that they don't. But what you find when you talk to the kids, especially who get sent off to these other schools, is that they want those things, but culture overcomes them. Like their cultures overcome them in the sense it pushes them to do things that they don't want to do. And we can understand in that way like how culture drives them and forces them into boxes that then the school also then punishes them for too.
Got it. And just quick clarification, when you say culture pushes them to do things they don't want to do, you mean school culture?
Outside too, right? Like, so like, for instance, another kid sharing with me that like, he had no want to fight, but where he comes from, if someone stepped to him, he would have to. Because it would make trouble for him at home. And so for him, this wasn't a choice, right? And as much as he didn't want to do it, this choice was imposed upon him. And sometimes the school then doesn't recognize it because there's no conversation that happens.
Got it. Yes, there's a lot of complexity in what you just shared. What else? Thank you so much for doing that, being the first person to share in the room. Yes.
So I first bounced around thinking about, well, do I work with kids? Do I write kids I'm working with this year? Or, I was telling them, I was like reeling back on all these students over the past, I can think about my first year when I taught preschool 10 years ago and those kids now. And like Target's a hotspot, so I run into past students at Target all the time. I told them on Friday I ran into a group of, they're now seniors in high school at Target. But I stuck with students from this year, and my role this year is district writing. Technically it's like restorative practice, teacher on special assignment. So I feel like it gave me the privilege of knowing these kids like on a personal level, right? Like I have access to all of their like academic data, but I'm not in that classroom lens this year. So I thought of like first kind of surface level, right? Like the things they're interested in, like their sports or music or like fashion, their sense of humor. But then I also thought about like their loyalty, kind of their friendship and bonds, or like that cultural knowledge, language being a part of that as well. Like voice being a really strong point of this group, or just like young people in general, that they're not confused about what they think or how they feel. and helping them like develop that in a way that, I don't know, that they can be heard, right? Humility, and I think that's tied in that like voice and culture piece. And then also I wrote like life, in that I feel like a lot of these kids where, in my role I'm supporting them with like those kind of tier 2 and 3, right, behavior supports, and like a lot of it comes down to these power dynamics where these kids like, again, have, yes, they're middle schoolers, but have a lot of like life knowledge, right? And like almost street smart, if you will. Like, I don't know how to exactly describe it, but it's like there's this level of like hard work, resilience, life knowledge that I think is really powerful too.
Yeah. They know the game.
Yeah.
One more, and thank you for speaking in a big group. I feel like there was a lot of people who thought in that similar way that you all are thinking. That's really good. Thank you. Yes.
I'll give a counter narrative, because we spoke here and we're talking about East Coast, West Coast, Kentucky, and also from Fresno, Cali.
Yeah.
So we work with the adult learners, and the adult learners are not all too different from the young ones, just larger, third graders. So power dynamics, everything. So we talk about basically your fronts of knowledge, because they'll tell you what, you know, if you work with superintendents, principals, all the way down to teachers and so forth, beginning teachers, they'll tell you what you want to hear, but then you're always trying to see the things that they don't know, right? And the things that you as someone in power, someone in influence, you have that ability to look deeper and past that and ask the right questions, so that you can just develop that person to make the right decisions.
Yeah, funds of knowledge. Thank you so much for bringing that into the space. Great. So everybody wrote down students, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. And everybody has some stuff that they know, the students that you wrote down. Okay, minus the adult students, for the sake of this conversation. I want you to think about the kids that you wrote down. What percentage of the kids that you wrote down would be deemed as successful based on standard measures? Take standard measures however you want to. And tell me the percentage out loud. What is the percentage of those students that would be deemed successful by standard measures? Say? 75.
Like 10.
10.
A third.
A third. 33%.
100.
100.
99.
99. 20. What about this side room? Doesn't matter, remember.
I'm not an educator, so I just wrote down coworkers. But
Oh, okay, got it. Students? 0.
60.
60. Got it. For the people who said 100 or 99, what criteria did you use? For the people who said 100 or 99, even 75, what criteria did you use? Who were those students?
So, because I'm a board member,
Yeah.
I was using students that I've met or that are my family or their friends. And it would be the criteria that is in the school system presently.
Got it.
And that's education, like just the root of the education. I come from a very small school.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much. I've done this activity like 15 times at this point. And it comes as an offshoot of an activity from the Culture Responsive Leadership Institute. And what is so interesting, every time I do this activity, is the majority of people have less than 50% when I ask about criteria. And I find it interesting with the 100%, see how she said family, right? People in her family. It's a little bit different, right? But when I ask people about this, and we're talking about the students in the school right now, it's often, at least the majority of the people tell me less than 50%. I bring this up to you all, not for us to be upset or anything. As I said, doesn't matter your criteria, whatever you said. But somehow we're in this situation where we know exactly why we need to be having a conversation about equity, working toward equity, and yet not only are some people pulling back on it, but we still seem to make it this super far distant thing. When every one of us right now knows a group of students whose needs are not being met. So when I'm getting ready to have this conversation with you all around equity, traps, and tropes, I'm not talking about out there, the district way out there, or the policy way out there. I'm talking about day to day in the school. This is why we're gonna have this conversation. I wanna give you an example. I started out as a teacher, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, oh my gosh, I'm gonna change the world. I'm gonna close the achievement gap. I joined Teach for America, I'm just gonna be honest. And I thought I was about to do that thing, okay? Got to my school. The focus was AYP, adequate yearly progress. I went down so fast. They can't read, they behind. How am I gonna do this? Mikkel was in there throwing chairs at me. This is my baby. He grown now. But Melissa's met Mikkel. But throwing chairs at me, it was a mess, right? And it was really interesting because as I got to know them, you see them dancing, they're so beautiful, they taught me so much, right? But as I was teaching and sucking at first, I had an administrator come to me and she asked me, as I said Mikkel, I would like him out of my class, and Darnell too. She said, do you want to work here? Do you want to work here? And I said, yeah, I want to work here. It's just like really hard because all the different things that they're dealing with, and you know, there's a problem with achievement. Like, I mean, what do you expect me to do? And she said, 99% of what happens in your classroom is in your control. You have complete influence around what happens in your classroom. So I'm going to ask you again, do you want to work here? Because if you want to work here, the responsibility to meet the needs of the children in front of you is yours. So I start this conversation by saying, it is overwhelming to think about working toward equity. But I believe and learned also from actually helping my students be able to meet their literacy goals, that 99% of what we are doing is in our control. So if you want to be in this conversation with me for the rest of this time, I just have to ask you to own that. Because it actually is. We can only control our daily actions and what we're doing with the kids and the people that we're working with. It's so hard to stay in this place though because of this stupid mark that we have. The test score. It's the thing that we have talked about now a whole bunch, even in this morning, that we value. And because of that, it's not necessarily my or our fault that we start to go through this deficit thinking lens. Because when you get the test scores back, they say the kids are below basic. We define a whole kid and say the whole kid is below basic. Or we say they're not meeting expectations, they're behind, they're difficult, they're at risk. And so all the things that you just wrote down go out of the door. All of them go out of the door. And we tend to focus in this place instead. And then, because we're focused in this place instead, and I'm going to talk about this in my keynote later, we constrain. More instructional time for the sake of intervention, and that's called working toward equity. Less time outside, less specials, less electives, more standards, more rules for the kids and the teachers. And now our whole grand vision of coming into education, it's already gone before we've actually even really started. The question I had been asking is, how do we free ourselves from this thing? Oh my gosh, it's so hard. What can we do so we can stop ourselves from not tapping into the genius of every child? I believe firmly, because I've seen at least some level of results, that it is about us working toward equity. And the National Equity Project says, if we are working toward equity, which I think I'll be defining in this session, if not in the one later in the afternoon, we must develop leaders who are focused on transforming institutions by specifically eliminating inequitable practices and cultivating the unique gifts, talents, and interests of every child, the things that you all wrote down. And if we can do that, we should see a reduction in the predictability of success for the students that we just mentioned. That's a wonderful dream, and I really, really like it. It sounds really, really good. And I believe you probably believe the same thing. And yet, for some reason, we say all the things, we know a lot of the things, and then when we get darn in the, school, we do other things. What is that about? When I wrote Equity, Traps, and Tropes, I wrote it as a love letter, actually, to educators that I was working with. Because I would know some really dope people, and I would see their efforts before they even really begin. And I was on the phone with Shane at the time, and I started ranting. I was mad this one day. And I was like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. She was like, that sounds like something. Maybe we should call it a thing. And that's how we got to Equity, Traps, and Tropes. It was an opportunity to name the things that people are experiencing every day and to provide language so that we can have discourse that is honest, authentic, and actually gets us to do something different. That is where I want to begin. Starting with acknowledging the complexity. I mentioned that when you spoke. I said there's a lot of complexity in what you said. This is not easy. This is the first quote in chapter 2. It's from 1811. It says, abolitionists want to remove what is oppressive, not reform it, not reimagine it, but remove oppression by its roots. Abolitionists want to understand the conditions that normalize oppression and uproot those conditions too. Abolitionists, in the words of scholar and activist Bill Ayers, demand the impossible and work to build a world rooted in the possibilities of justice. I want to point out two things. She said, understand the conditions that normalize oppression. Then you get to demanding the world of possibility. So this session is about understanding the conditions that normalize oppression in a very concrete and tangible way. We're gonna put this in the perspective of the big system, right? To just have a lot of empathy and affirm what we are doing. This is the architecture of schooling. This is the model that our education system was built on. Very quick read history lesson that you already know. The schools that we have now built based on the Industrial Revolution, we were building a lot of stuff. We needed a lot of people to do work and work quickly to build the stuff. And so the schools became based on the model of the factories and the people who were building the stuff, right? Now some people didn't have to build the stuff. Well, it wasn't my group. But some people didn't have to build the stuff, and some people had their identities crushed in the process of building this stuff. But this is the system we have. And so schools have ringing bells that tell you where you need to go from subject to subject. Students are in rows oftentimes, and we need to batch process them for, well, now we say college and career readiness. Schools are still the same. I still see rows like all the time. And what's so interesting is that it says at the end of the day, the schools was built on corporate interests. It is the exact same right now. I'm gonna tell you, I love 21st century learning, the idea of it. But it comes from Hewlett-Packard, who was trying to figure out what are the skills the next generation of professionals, workers, need. That's what it's based on. And so I have a lot of affirmation and empathy for us because this is what we're up against. And even when we have a disruption like COVID, y'all remember that thing, we still cannot get ourselves unstuck. I love this quote from Crystal Watson. She said, reimagine school, they said, and we did just the opposite. We are running back feverishly to the status quo. Get that learning loss out of here. It's where we are. The point of this is simply for empathy. The pull of the dominant paradigm is extremely strong. And it makes me really sad, really, really sad. It makes me even more sad because right now we in some stuff right now. Talking about taking away funding for schools who want to talk about equity and stuff like that. Closing departments and stuff. You know, like we really in some stuff right now. So I have a lot of empathy for that. And I have to ask myself to kind of slow down so that I do not get caught up in the weeds. Because if I'm all up in the weeds like that, I cannot have an abundance mindset. So what helps us slow down to have an abundance mindset? Well, one of the things we did was ground ourselves as children. Another thing that we can do is ground ourselves in our own personal stories. If we stay with what's really going on and what we know and what we've experienced, it can help us stay a little bit more grounded. So I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable and share with you all a little bit of my personal story, talk to you about the equity traps and tropes, and then let you all discuss all of this. So a time of personal crisis for Miss Jamila. That was me, and I was super fly, okay? I just want to say, I had all the Jordans. I stood in all the lines. I had Rockaware up the yin yang. Okay? I couldn't really wear baby fat. It didn't fit my style. But I had streetwear was a big thing. Okay? But I wasn't doing nothing at school. Okay? at this time in my life, so I did fine in elementary school, that was all great. Middle school, that was okay, it's a very awkward time. But by the time I got to high school, I started 9th grade and I was doing just, I had a 3.0, that was like, okay. And I remember being in schools, and when I got to 10th grade, I was in honors placement. No, 9th grade, I was in honors placement, and that's before AP. And I remember seeing none of my friends in my classes, and so I like dropped those classes, and I went to general ed, and that's where I had a good time. Now, at the same time that this was happening, my mom had just left. Like one day I saw her, and then she left. And that had a huge, devastating impact on me. That is not the time to leave a girl. Not the time. I was super depressed. My self-worth was non-existent. And ultimately, I fell out of high school. Now, at this same time, my father, who I cursed out with as many FUs as I possibly could, decided he was going to do two things. One, put me in an Afrocentric school, and also put me in a program to help me rebuild myself. This is what happened in that program when I was in that crisis. I walked in, soft music. We got into a circle in a small group. We talked about what our nights were like the day before, got grounded. Then we had a choice to go to multiple places if we wanted to. Could do some art if we wanted to, soft music room. We would be pulled for both therapy and we would be pulled for instruction. By the time we got to the end of the day, we were back in a circle. How did we experience the day? And then we left. And I really, really improved. And I felt like held. I had never experienced so much choice before. And as I said, I improved. Now, when I think about that, I would have to imagine, couldn't we do the same thing for our students? If we are experiencing the level of crisis that we experienced during COVID, could we not start a circle restorative? Could we not do that? Could we not give a little more choice? I think we could. But instead, because of that dominant paradigm and missing the mark, that's not what we do. Instead, because of that mark, we tend to do things like this. Oh, shoot, the scores then came out. We are not where we need to be. We got an F. They got an F. And so we do things like this. Know that there's crisis. Let's take COVID, for example. But instead, where's the SEL curriculum I can buy? Because we need to fix the SEL, we gotta buy the curriculum. Who has it? Do you have one that I can use? Now, we don't have a lot of time, so we're gonna do 10 minutes at the beginning of the day. 10 minutes. If you're lucky, you get an advisory once or twice a week, 20 to 30 minutes. Nobody knows how to do the curriculum, but I think you went to a training, so can you do a quick PD during the first week of school? We're not coming back to it, but can you do that PD for us? And we expect for you to know how to do the thing. Administrators, we got a lot of pressure. We start walking through with the checklist. Are you doing morning meeting every day? Is morning meeting happening every day? I did not give you the PD, I know. But I'm looking for a morning meeting to happen every single day. And if I do not see what I need to see in terms of kids improving, we gotta get them ready for SST, MTSS, Tier 2, Tier 3. We go right back. All these things we know, and we go right back. This is what I call traps and tropes. A trap is a mechanism or a device designed to catch and retain. It quickly allows entry but does not allow exit. A trope is something we've seen many times before. I want to map the things I just said to traps and tropes. That SEL training was really great. We can come back to it. For now, it's time to move to instructional planning. Have y'all ever been in that? You like do the bias training or the SEL training or whatever, and then y'all go plan instruction? Okay, shouldn't those like go together? It's called siloing equity. Clear vision, but it's like apart. Doing equity. Well, we did the SEL PD. We listened to students. How come nothing is changing? You did the PD? How many times y'all do the PD? Y'all know even this PD right now is not going to be effective. The research already says it. It will give you an entry point. But the entire system has to take the work up. And by system, I mean us as individuals, as teams. Boomerang equity. We can do SEL. We can do that. But for those who aren't prepared for the test, we got to pull them out of that time for intervention. They typically are the kids who need it the most. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about this because you've heard my voice now for 10 minutes. I want you all to use a QR code. It should take you to a 2-pager for the equity traps and tropes. And when you get to that 2-pager, I'm going to give you an opportunity to read it. And when you're reading it, I want you to identify for yourself, let me move out of the way. I want you to identify for yourself what feels familiar. Where do you see the traps and tropes playing out in your context and work? And why are these traps and tropes so seductive? Give us about 3 to 4 minutes to just do that reflection. You can write down notes if you want, and then we're gonna have some team time to discuss.
This to me is dangerous. I'm literally just like around.
Just leave it on the table.
Oh.
Yep, they clean it off after every breaks up.
And you have, I think, 2.5 minutes before we get to the discussion. Whenever you're ready, if you would discuss with your table what feels familiar, where have you seen these playing out in your context, and what makes them so seductive.
And I think where they feel that way like on multiple levels, right? When they decide is like kind of at off level
So I'm not. So I'm just trying to listen, but I even from like the athletic standpoint, the leader, I feel like I just even see what's happening. So it's like, oh yeah, they've got some.
I don't think we're at this place where it's like,
And so I feel like
we're not like, I don't think membership is like the
superficial.
color, like
It's like, yeah, he's with efforts, but like, no one is
there's really strong
regulation of very well. So I guess that's been my experience with seeing it in communities, where it feels more super. Like to keeping
and they're they want.
And that's why I think it is like really measurable value, because you don't actually know.
Like literally it's called like
Katie, my name is yeah, so actually,
You have one more minute?
but I just actually took over. Yeah, so just took over. So working with engineers and designers, managing the division. We're doing a demo later, so 3 weeks in, but I'll do my best.
see, I'm doing the thing and it doesn't work.
Yeah, those
doing the it's really hard because you can't focus. You have to be so measure and assess. So,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh, that one was hard to bring back. This one's hard. This one was particularly hard because your conversation got louder as we got to the end. So I know there's things that you all were getting into. If we had a whole day together, we would spend a lot more time talking about it, but I'm very conscious of your time. But I do want to extend the conversation into the whole group. What came up for you all? What were you all talking about?
Well, I can say, so I'm a charter school administrator, and so the test scores determine whether or not our school exists. And so we have to balance, and I work for a couple of charter schools. We're a non-classroom based school, and we are just the target of all vitriol. I mean, we're getting shut down left and right. We have this system where if you have good test scores, you're supposed to get renewed, and those schools are not getting renewed. It really is, and I feel like what we are doing is the change. It is different. It's not the sitting in rows and the sit and get. And so, you know, we hear from our families that they are spending, you know, time on these SEL practices, not just a learning, but like their whole education experience is different and it is personalized. And so as an administrator, I have to find the balance in figuring out how to get the test scores that we need, even though no one wants to do it. And I have a lot of families that just straight up opt out. But in California, that means they get the lowest score. And so my school looks bad because I have families that don't believe in testing. So I have to figure out how to continue to provide a program that meets the needs of our families within this system that doesn't support that. And I think that is just a representation of what we're dealing with in so many different ways, that's always the fight, right? How do you make change when the overall system won't change? I talked about that this morning, right? We don't need to change the kids, we need to change the system. But we have to work within that system in order to change it. So,
Thank you. Who would like to add to the discourse? Yeah, I'm not gonna respond yet, I wanna give you all an opportunity to talk, yeah.
Definitely echoing that, in our district, we're definitely guilty of a lot of the tropes and traps. One that stood out in particular is that siloing equity. I'm the Dean of Curriculum Instructor Assessment at my site, and I've always found that it's a big problem within our system that we have a culture and climate department that's completely separate from our curriculum and instruction department. And so then it does fall into those, here's your SEL lesson, here's your culturally responsive teaching practice. It falls into those checklist items when really we have to recognize the complexity of culturally responsive practices and that it all just must live and mesh together, and that's what we do day in, day out, all day long.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for bringing your voice into a big group, yeah. What else?
Something I noticed when, also like the siloing piece is something that happens a lot. But I think that navel gazing equity, and I see it in a few different ways depending on the school size. So I see it sometimes in like that minimal training, right? Where it's like, okay, here's the curriculum, here's the hour-long training, and go for it. Are you on the PACE guide, right? But I also notice kind of like a superficial level of implementation too, where it's like this person might have the training, they might have the opportunities, but there's not that level of like introspection, buy-in, or understanding of like systems of inequity, identity, intersectionality. And so they might like go through those motions and say, I'm doing the curriculum, I'm doing the circles, but it's done without intention, and then that process becomes more harmful than helpful, right? And so then the answer is like, well, it doesn't work. I'm doing the thing and it doesn't work, right? And so that navel gazing is something I think that comes up a lot too.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of the traps and tropes all throughout that. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think on the outside of all of it, one thing talking about there, like, when you look at like health insurance, like we get more of what we pay for. Like we know prevention programs keep people out of the ER, but we use the ER to feed people. And then that's how we reimburse, right? So all the money goes to the ER, and then no one's reimbursing for these prevention programs. And I see a parallel there on the education side, right? We get more of what we pay for in the sense that we, the data and test scores are the currency to a certain extent of education, so we're gonna get more of that stuff that we pay for. And like the opening video today is, I worked on that, and the watch metaphor for me is really important. And so like, we're talking here about this idea, we have these two things that are separate. We don't put them together, but we're talking about kind of two different pieces of incoherence here. One is we can, within our systems, complete that watch in the system we can control. Like we can put those two things together if we see it. But then you're talking about the deeper incoherence, which starts to now move out to the state level. Where is that creating inequality? And those become the things that are more difficult to fight. But in our everyday, it's like we can see better the fact that this gear fits together if we realize this is a watch. And for me, on the social emotional learning side, it's like, here's a curriculum that completely zaps creativity, when this is a watch where nothing's more important than what happened to this kid last night at home. In the sense of like, I'm not gonna hear you for what you have to say. So that is a gear in the sense that that fits together. And I've smashed it and I don't realize that that part is talking to this gear, trying to educate. And if I can see that this is a watch and I can realize that that fits, then it makes me think more coherently about how I can connect those things. And I have the ability to do that within the system I'm trapped in, still.
Okay, well, I don't need to say anything then. That's what I was gonna say. So,
We sort of piggybacked on that at our table about talking about the new UPL placemats, right? How now that it's been redone, pulling that idea of culture, and UPL was supposed to remove the barriers, but we left that piece kind of out in the previous placemats, and now we've really got that embedded. And if you can get your staff to buy into that, right? That it is about building those relationships. It's about, before we worry about accessing that curriculum, right? Before we worry about, and then also that we know who our students are and how they can relay their knowledge. And I think we see some elements of things moving in a good direction, but then of course when someone who's a director, who's at a district level, then the hard work is let's get everybody on board, right? So.
Yeah, that's a huge piece of it. So, just keeping in mind time, great. So, everything that you all said, you already know is all true. I think where the dissonance lives, and especially it's gonna be hard to probably engage in the keynote when I say this, but like, what if I don't care about the test score? I just don't. Then what is gonna happen? Like, seriously, give yourself the opportunity to truly think it through. What happens if we decide today that I'm not going to play the game of the test score?
My school gets shut down.
Does it?
Yes.
If you decide that you're not gonna play the game of the test score, your school will get shut down?
If my kids do well on the test, my school will get shut down.
So here's what's interesting that I find about that. That was a lot of steps, very quickly. Very quickly. If I don't play the game of the test, my school will get shut down. Now I didn't say I'm not gonna play the game of the test and I'm gonna do nothing. I said I'm not gonna play the game of the test score. So then what other games do I have to play?
Could you other assessments besides the state test score?
You're starting to go there.
Yeah.
What other options do we have? Because I'll tell you what option when we say we're gonna play the game of the test score, which I have told you, there's no judgment in that at all. What are you gonna say to the family? So the test score is now more important than my experience? Is that what you're gonna tell the student? That we're gonna tell the teachers that this is what is important? Because your attention cannot hold both things at one time. It can understand and integrate them, but if we're really serious about working toward equity, and I'm gonna get into the keynote too, that just can't be the game that we play. But we have games we have to play. There are a whole bunch of options available to us. But the thing I want to bring to your attention in this session is the incongruence and the dissonance between the espoused intentions we have and our actually actions and our impact. Because every action that we take has an impact. And every inaction we take has an impact. And that is extremely, extremely hard. And I will admit that when I'm saying this to you, I have the dissonance too, like, man, in the reality, like, this is what it is. But I also have the gift, I've been so lucky to work with administrators, like Anna Mae Schuster, who said to me, do you want to work here? It can be a choice that we make to play the game a little bit differently. So, with that being said, I want to give us an opportunity, even as we're in the system, because we're not where we want to be. That's why we need radical dreaming. I'll talk about that later. But we are in the system as it is right now. So what the heck can we do tomorrow, if this is the case that we're in right now? Oh man, but I love this quote. Oh, young Pueblo. He says, to see your hidden patterns, you need to intentionally build self-awareness. All these patterns are so hidden, they're obvious too, but hidden. Question your perception. Build a compassionate and honest internal dialogue. Dig deeper into what your real motivations are. And have the humility to know you can learn more. Self-awareness combined with action opens the door to real change. We really got to do some interrogation around our intentions and what we're actually up to when we're making the decisions that we are in service of equity. So, what can we do differently here? I want to give you all 2 ways to think about doing something a little bit differently. The first thing is this. I do not like when people use words and they do not define them. And I've said the word equity now like 10 times and have not said what I actually mean when I'm using that language. And that's one of the things we need to just get a little bit better at. Say, what the heck are we talking about? To work toward equity is to acknowledge that our systems, practices, and narratives are designed to perpetuate disparities in outcomes for Black and brown students. Thus, there is no path to equity without using the context to guide your approach or game. Because the system is designed to have us doing exactly what we're doing. It means that in this system, we have to deliberately identify the barriers that are predicting success or failure. It means that we have to really interrogate our own personal identity, examine our biases, our beliefs, and the way that we, as in you and me, are contributing to inequity, because we're all doing it, all of us. We have to reallocate resources, time, tools, support, so that people can get what they need. But the one that I want to take us back to from the beginning of this session is this, the one that we forget. That ultimately, when I'm saying working toward equity after all of those things, it's really about cultivating the unique gifts and talents of every person. Everyone possesses something. So if I say I'm not going to play the game of the test score, and I want to play the game of cultivating the unique gifts and talents of every student, what would change? Does mastery come out of that? No, it does not. You can if you want to, but mastery to me is a non-negotiable. I didn't say a test score, I said mastery. I'm not doing my job if you leave my classroom and can't read. That's just a fact. Or at least make 1 year of growth. If you in a 3rd grade reading level, you in 6th grade, you better get to 4th grade level if I'm doing my job. That's just a fact. But we like to play a lot of games around that. Don't let me get off track. Mastery must stay. Don't have my babies out here now reading now, come home. But everything I'm saying, that's obviously an ideal. To get to this place of different assessments and get to this place where we think about things more expansively, that is a wonderful ideal. And I have to, again, keep naming the complexity. The reality is, even if we have a broader vision, we are working with complex change, and it really is like a whole shit show to get there. I mean, let's just be honest, it is. You think Anna Mae wanted to tell me, do you want to work here? She probably was expecting I'd do my job, but I really didn't, so. Because this is a complex problem, I have to be able to name what is working for me and what is not. If this was a complicated challenge, it would be a little bit different. A complicated challenge is a challenge where the solution is not immediately obvious, but it can be known prior to taking action. It requires just expertise. So that would be something like increasing the volume and variety of assessments teachers use, right? If we want to have a different mark. You could do that, you just need to talk to the right people to figure out different assessments that you can do. But these are complex challenges. And with complex challenges, the solution to the challenge is not known. It can only be seen or known during or after the action unfolds. It requires inquiry. So it would mean, what if I don't use this as the mark? We don't know. Something really bad could happen. But if we're taking complex challenge really seriously, we gotta slow down and walk into that inquiry. It's different from the first one. The volume and variety is a complicated challenge. But when you say creating an environment where teachers are encouraged, celebrated, and reinforced to use a variety of assessments, and ensuring that the diversity in assessment leads to success on multiple measures, in our context, that's a completely different challenge. It means we have to slow it down. We have to use inquiry. And so I'm going to offer you 2 ways to think about this idea of using inquiry. 2 different things. One is for today, one is for overall. The first one is the overall street data, which is the entire book. I'm going to give you just a very little, it's a long book, and how it might help us. Because if we took up street data, potentially there could be some new possibilities specifically around the use of data in relation to this equity mark. It might mean that data could be potentially humanizing, data could potentially be liberatory, and it could potentially be healing if we walk into the inquiry and see, could we let it? Street data comes from listening leader. There's 3 levels of data. The first level is satellite data. Satellite data is the one that we are mostly talking about, the test score that leads to us having the school or not. That's SBAC, graduation rates, attendance rates, all those things. That data is helpful to a certain degree. It's like a dipstick. It does give us a sense of where we are overarching. I'm actually not saying get rid of test scores. I'm not getting in trouble. that's people can argue about that somewhere else. It gives me information, but not everything I need. You can come in closer to the math level. It gives me more. That's like student and family surveys, running records. You see my master is still in there. I need to know if the kids are learning how to read. But it gives me a little bit more. We think the meat, though, lives in street data. And that is the empathy interviews, analysis of student work. The kids aren't meeting the test score, but did you look at the student work? Because they didn't do shit in the class. So why are you expecting that they would master anything? This is not a joke. The amount of classrooms I've gone into with leaders and they have not looked at student work or resist looking at student work is a real thing. We could. Okay, so focus. I'm gonna give you an example of this. And you're gonna tell me which one is more actionable, okay? Students with IEPs on a satellite data scored 50% lower than students in general ed. Have you seen something like this before? I know that you have. MAP data says that the students with IEPs scored 60% lower than students in general ed on the math benchmark. More information, maybe math is a place to focus. A lot of us will go straight to intervention because of that test score. But I did this as an actual school leader. Looked at, I think, 344 classrooms. Modifications and accommodations were only in 42. So why would you expect the student to be able to perform on the test when they didn't get their accommodations and modifications? The IEP is only for accommodation and modifications unless it says something different. So when I say, what if I don't chase the test score, could I chase IEP modifications and accommodations being met? Because I'm much more likely to get to the test score, if that's the mark, or the mastery on the project-based assessment, whatever it is, if I'm focused on a different thing. And we would say that thing might be street data, with a specific focus on students at the margins. Could we just reorient a little bit to more of the day-to-day, what's actually coming out of the classroom? Which one is more actionable? What do you all think? I would say number 3, correct? There are a million ways to gather the street data to help us reorient ourselves. You can do it today, tomorrow, next week, where we just simply say, you know what, in this data meeting, actually we're not gonna talk about just the assessment that we got. In this data meeting, I wanna look at all 5 of the kids who have IEPs they're writing. I wanna look at their writing today. What are they producing on the writing? And how much is that writing that they're producing, how much does it show that the modifications and accommodations that we gave are working? It's a different orientation. That's the overarching lens. The thing I wanted to leave you all with is the more day-to-day lens. We kind of talk to people about planning with complexity in mind. That's just already naming that this shit is gonna be hard. Sorry, I keep cursing, I can't. When we plan with complexity in mind, the first thing I think we have to do is cut this whole like we have to do this, that, and the third, and start radically dreaming. What are we actually trying to do with these babies? Why are we here? Why did you sign up? What is the future? What do they want? What do we want to see? We do not give ourselves time to even think about what we're actually trying to do, generally speaking. So we say, let's start with radically dreaming. Once we have a sense of what we're actually trying to do, we know that we have been operating in a certain way, so we have to slow down to build awareness of the things that are going to get in the way. We don't have to be afraid of them. They're going to happen. I think I do like pretty good work, but I've been following Tropes all the time. I'm really like thinking about tokenizing equity right now and how I can keep addressing it. We say you build awareness of what's going to get in the way, you center street data, and then you set an intention. I'm going to focus just on the building awareness piece because you all are doing amazing work, I know, every single day. So what can we do to build awareness of what's getting in the way of your work right now? This comes from Culture Responsive Leadership from my dear friend Muhammad Khalifa. He says the practice of critical self-reflection allows leaders to see how oppression and marginalization is happening right now and to catch it as it newly positions itself in our organizations because it will continue to. So I wanted to give you all a tool to look at, and we're gonna see if this can be helpful to us today and tomorrow. If you use the QR code, it should take you to the equity traps and tropes, avoiding equity traps and tropes, preventing, working around, trying to get better at. And you should see the traps and tropes on the left. Let me move out of your way. You should see the traps and tropes on your left. And you should see a set of inquiry questions on the right. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to give you a minute to just look at one trap or trope that you identified in your conversation earlier. How would those inquiry questions help you when you're doing your work tomorrow? If we're going to address equity traps and tropes and take on the 99% responsibility, how could those inquiry questions help us tomorrow? I want you to look at it for a minute, and then I want to give you a quick opportunity to talk with a partner about that question, and then I'm going to take us to close. Once you've looked at the trap or trope and the inquiry questions, please with a partner, how would these types of questions help you do your work better, especially in terms of trying to disrupt equity traps and tropes? How might this help you? Don't read them all. Just choose them.
I think it's amazing for asking students, because I think that's a sign of quality of like, if these teachers are actually incorporating it into the day-to-day in the classroom, hopefully see students. I think we yeah, but with all that is an easy thing for ask a question.
All right, I know that one was quick. But if you could come back in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2, and 1. Maybe just 2 people. How could this be helpful to you, if at all? Could it be helpful? Maybe not. I don't know. How might this be helpful to you to use these inquiry questions to help you disrupt the traps and tropes?
So I think that these are super helpful. And to what somebody somebody was saying when we were reflecting in the larger room, is like, it's overwhelming at the same time, because we fall into a ton of these, right? And there's, I talk a lot about just I say false urgency, but that's kind of, you know, it's kind of hard to say when you know, the needs. But when we're constantly in crisis or urgency or stress or overwhelm, we're not slowing down enough, right? But if we slow down, then our kids are still, going back to the test score, kids are still 1 and 3 on grade level. And that's unacceptable. So it's urgent, it's a crisis, that's gotta go to the side, right? So it's overwhelming in the sense of like, I don't know, everything that we're talking about this morning is like, okay, well, you gotta blow up the system and start again, and it's like, ooh.
So I'm not gonna actually take another person, and I wanna stay right there with where you are, because it is such an overwhelming feeling. There's 3 things I want to offer. When we are in crisis mode, survival mode, we see a lot of families in crisis and survival mode. We see a lot of then dysregulated children as a result. Are they passing the test? Nor will you. Every time we allow ourselves to name the survival, but then not do the work. Now, I know some of y'all probably in therapy, because it's popular right now. That therapist be talking about being grounded, getting back to your body, slowing down, being aware, self-care, healing. And you'd be like, but I got the kids and I got all this type of stuff. And then you're like, well, how are you supposed to heal if you don't do that? So this does take an immense amount of change. But I want to offer something just a little bit more simplified. What if I just don't make it urgent today? What if I make it intentional? What if I don't rush to get to this meeting? What if I give myself 10 minutes to plan? What if I don't do all 10 topics in today's meeting and I do 5? Just an opportunity for us to slow down. The questions create more questions, I know. But the moving quick with the level of action we are taking right now takes us to the very beginning of the session. We have kids in front of us right now who know hella shit. And then because we have decided, through a lot of pressure, don't get me wrong, it's real pressure, that that's going to the side, and instead the mark is going to be what it is. And I implore you from the deepest places of my heart, my ancestors, your ancestors, that we stop. And my offering for you all as we get ready to close is for you to give yourself permission to say, dang, this is a lot, and then find one question that you can ask differently tomorrow and just see what it does. Just see what it does. And we'll keep working in collaboration to try to do this thing. So I appreciate you all for allowing me to be with you.